In 1860, if you wished to reach New York, you did so by boat. Steam ferries packed with passengers made continuous voyages between the twin cities of New York and Brooklyn. For it would not be until 1898 they would be united. When an ice jam filled the river with frozen debris, travel between the cities would stop. Seeking a more permanent solution, one less vulnerable to the whims of nature, the New York State Senate passed a bill that would see a bridge built spanning the East River. This bridge was to be made by the New York and Brooklyn Bridge Company, with John Augustus Roebling named chief engineer. Building the Brooklyn Bridge, then the longest suspension bridge in the world, would require innovation in both logistics and materials. Roebling himself contributed much to the development of steel cables, a material far stronger than the iron chains used on older bridges. The bridge would also use a hybrid design, part suspension and part cable stay, which gave it a distinctive look. All of this, however, ultimately relied on the two great towers which rested on underwater caissons. The job of digging these caissons down to the bedrock fell upon immigrants. These workers became known as Sandhogs. The excavation under the caissons was fraught with peril. Massive wooden boxes were sunk down to the riverbed before being pressurized with air. The Sandhogs would then descend to the depths, manually digging out the ground to sink the caissons further. The sweltering compressed air was contrasted by the frigid water the Sandhogs stood in, kept from rising only by the immense air pressure. Even more dangerous than the frigid waters was a new unknown, a strange affliction dubbed caisson disease. Today we know this as decompression sickness, or the bends. When the human body is subject to immense pressure, nitrogen begins to dissolve into the body tissue. If the pressure is released slowly, the nitrogen can safely escape the tissue. If released quickly, as happened when workers rose out of the depths of a caisson, the nitrogen would tear out the tissue in large bubbles, damaging the body as they emerged. In the worst cases, these bubbles could damage the spinal cord, paralyzing or even killing the unsuspecting worker. In the Brooklyn caisson, pressures reached upwards of 21 pounds per square inch, enough to paralyze Washington Roebling, the son of then late John A. Roebling. His wife, Emily Roebling, would take over much of his day-to-day work. Across the river on the Manhattan side, conditions were even worse. A deeper riverbed meant higher pressure and more injuries. By May 1872, the Sandhogs had had enough. They decided to strike for $3 a week pay and a 4-day work week. Their work, dangerous and hard as it was, went poorly paid at only $2.25. They managed to secure $2.75 for a 5-day work week, but too poor to sustain a picket line, they were ultimately forced back to work only a few days later, their greater demands unfulfilled. As pressure in the Manhattan caissons reached 35 pounds per square inch, Washington Roebling was left with a terrible decision. Over 100 Sanddogs had been injured, and 3 had died of caisson disease, and it was only growing worse the deeper they dug. Bedrock turned out to be deeper than originally thought, and it was unclear when it would be reached. To stop before bedrock was to take a risk that the sandy subsoil would not support the bridge, but to continue digging was to throw away lives. After careful consideration, Roebling decided that the soil would be sufficient and the digging would cease. After the filling of the Manhattan caisson with concrete, the job of the Sandhogs was complete. Still, the bridge had much work left before it would accept traffic. The construction would claim no less than 20 lives. Still, the project was undoubtedly a success and helped ease trade and travel between the two cities. A growing city had a great need for underground workers, and the profession grew dramatically in the following decades. The many subways of New York provided continuing work for the Sandhogs through the turn of the 20th century, and various municipal projects have kept the profession around ever since. Today, they continue their work by maintaining the city and digging out Water Tunnel Number 3. On July 30th, 1906, the United Tunnel Workers went on strike. Despite setbacks and continued hardships, the union lives to this day as the Local 147, now part of the Laborers International Union of North America. The Local 147 helps defend the rights and wages of modern sandhogs beneath our streets. From the clean water running from your tap to the bridges that span across the East River, the work of the Sandhogs surrounds us. It's safe to say that without the effort of the Sandhogs, New York City would not be as we know it today.